Welcome to the Bros Before Elbows podcasts with your hosts Anthony
and Tommy Masano,
bringing you rumors, recaps, predictions, and our classic banter and more, all the way from PDX and all the way from PHX. You know where it's coming from the top rope, always putting bros before elbows.
Very special edition tonight, very Portland-centric and very Northwest wrestling-centric. So get on your moccasins and grow out your beard.
And put on your plaid shirts and beanies all year round.
Is that how you guys roll up in Portland?
Oh, man. Sometimes that's how we roll. Pretty much all the time.
You got a beanie on right now, don't you?
Actually, I don't. It's been very, very warm and very nice out over the last couple of days. So I've been traveling, man. I've been floating back and forth between Portland and Eugene and the coast. So I've been experiencing all types of weather here.
You're a traveling man. So let's talk about our guests and let's talk about our sponsor. You want to tell the sponsor first, and then let's talk about our little guest on the line right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, this episode, just like last episode, was brought to you by the Forefathers of Portland Wrestling, a documentary that is hopefully to be made. It's a Kickstarter campaign, and check out the YouTube channel as well. But it is brought to you, this show, of course, brought to you by the Forefathers of Portland Wrestling, and we actually have the man, the myth, the legend, the man behind this campaign here, Matthew Merz. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to speak with you, bros.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Welcome to the ring of destruction, and primarily banter.
I love banter.
It's much better than destruction, yeah. I kind of favor that.
Oh, goodness. So let's jump into some wrestling talk here real quick. So I haven't seen the last, I'll admit, I haven't seen the last episode of Raw.
Wait, I thought we were talking about the. Wait.
No, we're talking about Raw now, Tommy. Get it together, man.
No, man. Lineup change. We don't have our teleprompters telling us that there's change in lineup
here. Upstairs for 2 minutes, and you guys flip the script on me. You guys are shooting on me right now, and just man, I feel.
I don't know.
You never know what to expect with the bros before elbows.
It's the Portland screw job right here.
It's like watching Monday Nitro when it didn't suck.
That should be our new tagline. I like that.
Yeah, actually, Nitro is badass. I remember the Nitro Cafe in Las Vegas. That was good.
Yeah, I got a pair of playing cards from there still.
Hell yeah, man! They had great burgers.
Are you serious? The Nitro Cafe? I don't even remember that. Did we go to that?
Yeah, man. It was in Excalibur.
Oh, okay.
How do I remember this, and you now remember this? That was rad.
I must have blocked it out of my memory after WCW got bought out by WWF.
Oh man! So Matt, do you do any magic tricks with your cards that you got from the Nitro Cafe?
I do not do any magic tricks with cards. I do have an excellent magic trick called Hide the Salami, but I'd have to show you that in person. I'm not going to be able to do that online.
It's a family. We're in the PG era, Matt. I mean, it's not the Attitude Era.
Oh, I apologize. I thought The Godfather was going to be on later.
He was just going to hide some salami somewhere. What connotation? You're crazy, man. You're crazy.
Was that too much? Am I too extreme? Am I going like Paul Heyman here?
ECW. Man, speaking of ECW here, real quick, man. Not in your house. Oh, I totally botched that pay-per-view. One Night Stand, 2006.
Have you guys ever watched the DVD with the alternate commentary with JBL?
No.
That sounds amazing.
So you know how like the WWE guys, they invaded the pay-per-view with tickets and sat there and watched?
Mm-hmm.
The whole time JBL had a wireless lapel on, so he's mic'd up. And it is definitely a different experience than you will ever have in wrestling. I guarantee that, because JBL's a little controversial and isn't afraid to shock people with what he says a little bit.
Oh goodness, where can we find this key gem?
Well, I would say eBay.com. That's probably where you would want to go. Amazon.com.
There you go.
Crazy. Oh, alternate commentary. I'd be interested in hearing that. That sounds pretty cool.
It was different.
So you must have obviously a huge wealth of knowledge of just of wrestling in general. I mean, clearly you're really trying to dig into the archives, targeted to the Portland or Pacific Northwest. So, man, your knowledge must be vast, dude.
I try. I will admit that I've kind of fallen off the last decade as far as keeping up with what's going on outside of this area. But yeah, I would say I have a pretty good wealth of information stored in my brain. Hopefully, I won't have a stroke halfway through this, and so we'll be able to keep talking.
Pop an embolism. Oh, wrestling, I'm dying.
We'll make you go back that far, hopefully. But what made so like a decade ago? What made you start getting into more of the local Portland scene and the Northwest, up there in the Northwest over there, rather than WWE at the time? What kind of drove you in that direction?
Well, I grew up on Portland wrestling since I was 3 years old, and it just gave so much to me in my childhood. I wanted to give something back to it, and I finally found a promoter for a long time in Portland. You got to understand, Portland wrestling shut down in 1992. It went off TV December 28th, 1991. But they closed their doors officially in 92 because Don Owen was like 180 years old by 92. And, he needed to retire, and his kids didn't want to take over the business, so they sold it to Sandy Barr. And Sandy kind of ran off and on. But really, after about 1997, I didn't even know there was any wrestling in the area. I mean, there was no internet at the time to find that kind of stuff out, and there was no TV being broadcast. So really, all there was WWE and, of course, WCW out here. And then in 2004, I met a gentleman named Bob Spiker who promoted a show called Dr. Payne's Clinic Wrestling. And it was kind of a backyard show, but it was the only show I knew about. And so I started there and slowly kind of made my way around to each promotion as I found newer and newer promotions in the area and I filmed everybody around here now over and over and over again, from WCWC in Salem to DOA in Portland to Blue Collar Wrestling, which is in North Portland. And everyone in between that's come and gone since then.
Dang, I've got a buddy out here in the Portland wrestling. He's rocking Ricky Gibson.
Yeah, I know. Is he in your band?
No. He's
That'd be awesome if he was in your band.
That would be
his
cool.
name is Ricky Gibson.
That would
He'd
be
have
cool.
to be the front man.
You could do like a Mighty Mighty Boss Tones thing where he's just the guy that dances on stage while you guys rock out.
As long as he's elbow dropping and power bombing people, that'd be sweet.
That would be very unique. People haven't seen that before. You got to do something different to get people to notice you.
Absolutely, that's crazy. So cool, man. So you've kind of you've been watching this wrestling and you just started getting deeper in the rabbit hole of the actual like Portland wrestling scene then.
Yeah, just filming and getting it on television in Portland. I think I produced 425 episodes of local wrestling in the last decade and made 2 feature-length documentaries. And every once in a while, I kind of get a little burnout on shooting local wrestling because it's 30 hours a week if you want to put together a quality-looking show.
Yeah.
So what I would do is every once in a while I would import wrestling from another area, whether it be Chikara out in New England, or there's a great promotion in Quebec called Northern Championship Wrestling, an excellent promotion out of SoCal called Epic War Pro Wrestling, and they've all been kind enough to send me footage from time to time that I can air and give myself a much-needed break.
Huh, that's really cool. So how'd you get into the whole filming? Did you go to school for film, or what? Did you always have a pad? Like a kid with a camera, when you were a kid?
I wasn't even a kid with a camera. I grew up in the theater, and I mean from kindergarten through high school was always in theater, and but always had an interest in film. And I had a friend who actually got me into public access, and I thought it was kind of a joke at the time. But one thing I noticed was you had all this access to professional equipment. And really, it was the only reason people think public access is a joke is because people don't put the time and effort into making their show look good. And I just, I literally picked up a camera, and I had watched wrestling so much. I guess I'm one of those few people that can kind of learn through osmosis.
Nice.
And I am very glad I did not spend $80,000 on a college education, because I've had quite a few people who graduated from film school who have actually come and asked me, hey, can I work on a project for you? Can you teach me how to do this? Because that's just, that's the real deal. You got to get in the game, and it doesn't matter if you have a college degree or not. If you get in the game and you stay on your hustle and you grind, and you'll eventually maybe get somewhere, if you've got a little bit of talent and a lot of heart and are willing to work 60 to 80 hours a week.
Caveat emptor, the 60 to 80 to 100 to a million hours a week. You're absolutely right, man. You're absolutely right, and that's cool that you kind of just fell into this naturally, and it's something that obviously you've been successful doing 425 episodes of shows. I mean, that's experience right there, man.
And we found a lot of luck too. When I first started, it wasn't just wrestling. We did this show. I know this is kind of off topic, but we did this show called Drinking with Darren in Portland, where we actually traveled. We were the first show about microbrewing.
Nice.
We literally traveled from Seattle down to Bend, Oregon, just highlighting different breweries and brew festivals. Every once in a while, we'd get a 12-pack of beer from our local bottling facility and do a mixed bag, sampling, tasting. And we ended up being so popular, we got on KUFO back when they were still a rock station and got to do a weekly thing on there for about a year and a half until CBS Radio sold it to whoever owns it now. And they changed the format to talk radio.
Wow.
So, I got pretty lucky. I got pretty lucky and got to work on a lot of corporate work since then and worked on a feature film as a camera operator and just did my thing,
Cool.
Yeah.
What film was that?
Oh, it was a film called Stripperland.
Oh, no way, dude.
I haven't seen that. Is that like on Netflix or where's that? What is that about?
It's on Netflix, yeah.
You know what? That sounds familiar. There was almost like I think it was a Battle of the Bands in Portland.
There was. The John Wayne Gacy Trio won that Battle of the Bands.
Yeah, my buddy's band Marco Luna played in that competition. I don't know if they got a track on the soundtrack or not, but yeah, I remember all, dude. That's cool. That's crazy you were in that.
This is purely speculation because I don't want to get sued, but purely speculation. But it's my understanding that no one who worked on that film got paid for working on that film. And
Juicy conspiracy.
I've
Allegedly.
also heard some speculation through the John Wayne Gacy Trio themselves that they also did not get anything they were promised for spending all the time it took to win the Battle of the Bands, and basically had all their music taken and used in the movie.
Shady. Yikes.
A little
the shady underbelly of the Portland entertainment scene we're discovering on this episode of Bros Before Elbows.
Hey man, Portland's known to Shanghai people and stuff them in tunnels. So
That is true.
that's
That's why I'm out here in Phoenix, safe, nice in the desert, where no one can hurt me and bury my body without ever finding it.
That's right. I moved from the strip club capital of North America to the kidnapping capital of North America.
Oh gosh.
Gosh. Why do I have 3 kids? I'm so depressed right now.
Oh my God.
But you mentioned he had 2 feature-length wrestling documentaries.
Yes,
when did those come out, and what are those about, and where can we find those?
Okay, well, the first one you can find on youtube.com/legitprowrestling. I broke it up into the 5 acts that it is.
Okay.
It's called Wrestling with Disaster, and we weren't even intending on shooting a documentary. Myself and some local wrestlers, namely Buddy Highway, who you might know from Portland Wrestling Uncut, we were invited to come work on a show in a little town called Clear Lake, California, which is a little bit north of San Jose.
Okay.
And we brought all the camera equipment. I was planning on shooting it because the guy had a bunch of names coming in. He had Violent J from ICP.
Oh gosh.
Corporal Robinson and Too Tough Tony, the Hatchet Boys from Juggalo Championship Wrestling. A slew of different West Coast wrestlers. And, we were just, effing around with the camera on the way down there. Just trying to make ourselves laugh and whatever. No, not even intending to put anything out involving a documentary. But when we got there, we knew something wasn't quite right with the promoter. You could just tell by looking at him that there was just something was kind of off with this guy. And we had the foresight to keep filming everything. And this entire show just starts to fall apart.
Oh man.
And we captured the whole thing, and what amazes me about it is the people that have found it the most fascinating are people who are not wrestling fans. And I don't know if I've ever seen a wrestling, whether it's a shoot video or a documentary, that is this real. I mean, it is really how the indie scene can be at times. It's worth a watch.
It's just like, is it like a train wreck that watching everything fall apart? Is that why it's so popular, you think? Or
it is a complete train wreck, and but we kind of took everything with a grain of salt. I heard from some of the other boys in the business around here that they couldn't believe that we didn't rough the guy up for making us drive 1,600 miles.
Wow.
But we just kind of took it with a grain of salt and just kept each other laughing in between, freaking out that everything was going sideways. But it's definitely worth a watch. I'd recommend you check out Wrestling with Disaster at youtube.com/legitprowrestling.
And what's the name of your other feature length one you have up?
The other feature length documentary is called Wrestling is Love. And that was actually shot as part of. Do you guys remember in 2010 when YouTube did their Life in a Day film?
Kind of, yeah. I vaguely remember that promotion and
Basically,
stuff
what
coming
they
up.
did was they asked all the YouTube channel operators, I guess, affiliates.
Mm-hmm.
I'm called a YouTube partner, I believe. They asked us to just film this one day. It was, I want to say it was June 23rd or July 23rd.
Mm-hmm.
And all across the world, people filmed that day, whatever they were doing that day, and submitted it. And I decided to follow my friend Kelly Schaefer, who was trained by Billy Jack Haynes back in 1988, 89, when Billy got out of the WWF. You know, he had a big wad of cash, and
Mm-hmm.
he came home to Oregon City, and he opened up a gym and also a wrestling promotion called the Oregon Wrestling Federation, and ran opposite of Don Owen, and stole some of Don's talent with his big money, and brought in some talent from out of the area. And you know, he ran maybe 3 months, and basically lost his ass.
Hmm.
And Kelly was one of the few guys that actually went through the training with Billy Jack Haynes, and you know, he trained for months, and he broke his leg. He tore his knee out, and like any young kid who's excited and passionate, he rehabbed his knee, but he got back in the ring too quick,
Mm-hmm.
and completely tore it out again his first time back in the ring. And his dream was basically crushed for about 20 years. And then we met, and he was he was 42 years old, and actually became a rookie wrestler at about 41, 42 years old.
Wow.
And
Living the
and I,
dream.
and so I spent a day with him, following him around, and it ended up being such an interesting story. And you know, interviewing other local guys like C.J. Edwards, Nate Andrews, my favorite wrestler Jeremy Blanchard,
Mm-hmm.
and we packaged it all into one documentary. And you can actually watch it if you go to Kickstarter.com
Mm-hmm.
and you search for the Forefathers of Portland Wrestling.
Okay.
If you contribute $30 or more to the Forefathers of Portland Wrestling, not only will you get a DVD of the Forefathers of Portland Wrestling, or a Blu-ray if you want,
Mm-hmm.
but you'll also be able to watch Wrestling is Love tonight, because
Oh,
it
nice.
is up there for anyone who contributes at the $30 level.
Oh, that's really cool. That's really cool. Okay, so you got those two documentaries on your belt about Portland wrestling centric topics, and then so what made you want to start the Forefathers of Pro Wrestling? What's your next challenge? I guess what made you want to do this one?
Well, you know, I slowly started to become fascinated with wrestling before the NWA era.
Mm-hmm.
And because people seem to forget that there was wrestling before the National Wrestling Alliance existed.
Mm-hmm.
And I just I went down a rabbit hole. You know how it is on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
just you kind of start going down
Absolutely.
a rabbit hole, and before you know it, you've stayed up for 48 hours straight, like 5 different occasions, reading and cross-referencing all these different stories that you find here and there. And after about 150, 200 hours of research, I realized I was at the tip of an enormous iceberg, and started contacting some of the historians I know in the Portland area. And they started giving me more information that is not even available to the public through the internet, that is kind of kept in-house, I guess you would say, and just shared amongst other historians.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really what kind of started me on that journey. Other than I found this obscure reference to a man named Joe Acton. And Joe Acton was the first world catch-as-catch-can wrestling champion. There's different styles of wrestling, if you guys didn't know. There's, you know, obviously freestyle, which is where professional wrestling kind of descended from.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, there was catch-as-catch-can, which freestyle kind of descended from. And we're talking about legitimate wrestling, you know, hookers, shooters, that type of
Mm-hmm.
thing. And Joe Acton was the guy who was the best wrestler in the United Kingdom, came out of Wigan over there, and came to the States because, you know, before then, people, you know, couldn't really travel the world in the way we can in the modern industrialized nation that we are.
Mm-hmm.
The guy bested everyone in the United Kingdom, came to America, and bested everyone here. The last decade of his life, he came to Portland, Oregon, and trained wrestlers at the Multnomah Athletic Club downtown until he died in 1917. And he's been mostly forgotten by time, but I tracked down his gravesite in Portland.
Mm-hmm.
And that's you know, probably where I really started at my interest in the turn of the century and wrestling before the Don Owen era of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Well, so you go back all the way to 1917 is where like the genesis of this kind of thing starts, and it goes before you cover topics before that too.
I am gonna, yeah, actually, I would probably start in at the turn of the century in 1900 because most people don't know this, but Frank Gotch, who was the greatest champion of his era and was really the guy that created the first World Freestyle Wrestling Championship, modern professional wrestling. Frank Gotch won his first American heavyweight title in Bellingham, Washington, from another shooter named Tom Jenkins.
Wow.
And really, it was Frank Gotch and his trainer, Farmer Burns, who slowly kind of created how you promote wrestling and how you work a circuit and run a territory. And it's really a fascinating story, because Gotch would be like in Chicago and Omaha and Boston and Pennsylvania, and he would be talking about a wrestler out here named Dr. B.F. Roller, who is completely forgotten to time now. And while B.F. Roller was out here on the Pacific Coast wrestling, he would talk about Frank Gotch and how he was excited to meet Gotch in the future, and they would slowly build to this big match they would have. And Gotch is kind of the guy that really created the idea of building the hype to the big fight. And today, that's almost impossible to do with the internet. But back then, people didn't realize that Frank Gotch, while he may have been in Omaha, Nebraska, he was still, B.F. Roller was part of his troupe of wrestlers, and they were working everyone. And people just didn't know that then. And it's kind of funny because if you read old news reports from the turn of the century, most people know that pugilism, or what we call boxing today, was not on the level then. And, there were a lot of shady different promoters who would rig fights to make money. And newspaper reporters also felt the same way about some wrestling. But they would come out and they would talk about Gotch and how he was a legitimate wrestler. And you could tell the difference between a legitimate wrestling match and a fake wrestling match that was rigged based on the type of moves that were done. If you're seeing something that's really flashy, that's not really wrestling, and those people are trying to work you out of your money. Whereas Gotch was smart enough to not use those flashy moves, even though he wasn't shooting all the time on his opponents because they were friends and working together to make money. And really, Gotch was, people don't realize this, but Gotch was so well known in the world as a wrestler that it was a little difficult for him to make a living because no one wanted to face him. And so Frank Gotch actually went up to the Klondike in Alaska for a few months, and he went up there under the guise of just being another gold panner and told everyone his name was Frank Kennedy, and would wrestle in mining towns and in sawdust mills and in different venues in different towns for money. And no one ever knew, because no one's going to wrestle Frank Gotch. You're not going to win. He's the best wrestler in the world. But, why wouldn't you wrestle a guy you don't know named Frank Kennedy? And Gotch walked out of the Klondike 4 months later with $30,000 in his pocket. Now, and that's not $30,000 today. That's $30,000 in 1901.
Oh, wow, man.
Wow,
that
insane.
That'll buy you a really shiny wagon wheel.
That it will. Frank Gotch actually was attracting like 7,000 people to wrestling events in Bellingham when there were only 4,000 cars in the entire nation. So that's a lot of people walking and riding horses to go watch professional wrestling.
Where's Bellingham for people who don't know the geography of that?
Bellingham is far north Washington, almost Canada.
Okay.
Almost to Vancouver, BC.
See, when I know Gotch and Hackenschmidt and names like that, I always think like that's always like Northeast or Midwest kind of thing. So I didn't know there was that stretched all the way out to the Northwest out there. So that's some amazing history out there.
Yeah, they would barnstorm their way across the nation, and they learned that from Farmer Burns, Martin Burns, who was the greatest wrestler before Gotch and trained him. And Gotch was out here and kind of learning that craft of how do you promote to that big match and that big fight before he went on to have the big world title promotion with Hackenschmidt.
Yeah. So that's a famous. Where was that one? Is that in New York, or where did they hold the Hackenschmidt versus Gotch? Where was that at?
I want to say was that in Chicago? I think it was.
Yeah, it was a huge city, actually, Chicago or New York or something, like maybe Boston or something like that. But yeah, that's.
they both made, tens of thousands of dollars off that match, and essentially they would be multi-millionaires today.
So going back to the Forefathers of Pro Wrestling, so it kind of ties into the 90th anniversary of the Owens family Portland Wrestling promotion. So that's, I'm guessing, if my math's right, around 1924-ish. Is that when that started?
I want to say that, okay, and that's another interesting story, actually. There was a man named Ted Thigh who was an incredible light heavyweight wrestler, one of the very best in the world, and he promoted Australia. And eventually he brought professional wrestling to Oregon, not to Washington, but to Oregon. And he hired a young man named Herb Owen, and that was Don Owen's father.
Okay.
And one time when Ted left town, I'm not clear if he went to Australia or if he went back home to Minnesota, I want to say. But while he was out of the state, Herb put the business in his own name and basically cheated Ted out of the business in Oregon. And so the Owen family, to me, I would say it was 1925, because I know that the Owen family promoted their 60th anniversary extravaganza at the Memorial Coliseum in Portland on May 21st of 1985. So next year would be the 90th anniversary of the Owen promotion. But wrestling's been here for over 100 years now.
Okay, so if I'm doing markers in my head, okay, so we have the shooters and the catch-a-catch-can wrestlers. Then in the 1925, we have the Owen promotion starting up. And then what's the next major benchmark? Is that when the NWA comes over, or is there another benchmark or
I would say
bookmark
that the next big benchmark, if we were to talk in broad strokes like that, the next benchmark would definitely be when Don Owen joined the NWA. At their, I want to say it was at their 4th annual meeting, September 7th through September 9th of 1951. Don Owen was made a member of the National Wrestling Alliance, and then the following year, he started his weekly television show called Heidelberg Wrestling, which was named after their sponsor, Heidelberg Beer. And that eventually became Portland Wrestling, of course.
Wow.
There's the beer connection and the wrestling connection again.
And that's, and see, I'm meant to be in
it. That's so crazy, man. It's obviously a huge wealth of knowledge, and I was looking at the Kickstarter campaign video, and you just want to just dive deeper into the hole. You want to get into the pit of these locations, and you want to interview and really dig even deeper in this rabbit hole, man. That's awesome.
I do really badly, actually. It's definitely a passion of mine. And one of the things we haven't really talked about was Gorgeous George, who is in the WWE Hall of Fame, even though he never really worked for the WWE, and was a big star of the early television era there in the late 40s, early 50s. People do not realize that he was a mainstay in the Pacific Northwest for a decade. In the 30s and the very early 40s, actually, he became Gorgeous George in the ring in Eugene, Oregon, and married his first wife in the ring. And it was so successful and drew so well that they actually repeated that marriage in multiple towns throughout the Northwest.
The origins of the pro wrestling marriage. It's still one of the great things they do on Raw, and on WWE and WF are famous for crazy marriages. And that started in Oregon with Gorgeous George.
Yeah, they stole that from Gorgeous George. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Everybody in wrestling stills, and that's okay. Another big name from here that is mostly lost to time is a gentleman named Kurt von Poppenheim. Kurt von Poppenheim started wrestling under his real name, Jack Pappenheim. And after
two great names, you could have went either way. That sounds like a badass, like a wrestler guy who's wrestled like bears and stuff in his backyard.
And Kurt von Poppenheim is credited amongst historians as the first guy to really get the Nazi gimmick over after World War II.
Oh God!
And was really the guy that inspired everyone that came after him who portrayed that gimmick, including Fritz von Erich. They all basically stole that concept from Kurt von Poppenheim, and I mean, that's a ballsy guy, put on a Nazi uniform after WW2 and walk around as a undeconstructed Nazi. I would say that takes a lot of balls.
That's really healing it up for the crowd. They're saying stuff bad about the Trailblazers, and then they're saying talking Nazi stuff to the crowd. There's different levels of Smack talk. But well, was there any other name? When you're speaking of big names that came out of the Northwest and Portland wrestling scene, is there any other names that people would recognize
Oh
offhand?
my gosh, you really
That
want to get into it? You want to get into
this
it now?
I don't know, maybe top three or top five. This is something
Let's
that,
go. Let's go with the top 12, right? Let me just rattle off some names here.
let's go with the top 75 real quick.
Okay, obviously the biggest name to ever come out of Portland, Oregon is Roddy Piper, hands down.
Amen.
And even though Piper didn't get his start here, Piper got his first real big push here.
Okay.
And Rod was always loyal to Don Owen. Even after he went to the WWE, he would not wrestle in Portland for the WWE and compete against Don because he respected the man that much. And if you know anything about the National Wrestling Alliance and wrestling promoters then and even now, they are not the most genuine people on earth. There are some shady con artists in this business, and Don is respected throughout wrestling history as one of the most honest promoters. Always good with the payouts. Even when Billy Jack Haynes tried to run against him with that OWF we talked about earlier and failed, Don took him back, and Don gave him a job. And that's, I don't know of anyone else that's done that other than Vince McMahon. And people can, talk bad about Vince and he's a scumbag and he's the devil and all that, but man, how many times did he give the Warrior a chance?
Mm-hmm.
He brought Sable back after she tried to sue him for millions of dollars. I would
Brock
say that's
Lesnar.
Brock Lesnar's another guy,
Mm-hmm.
and that shows, I think, the character of Vince McMahon as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And most business owners would never do that. And but Don Owen did that. Vince McMahon did that. Other big names though that came out of here. A big name that is not really known amongst WWE fanboys or TNA soldiers today is Playboy Buddy Rose. And he was probably, amongst local fans, they constantly debate to this day who was the greatest Portland wrestler, Roddy Piper or Playboy Buddy Rose.
Does Playboy Buddy Rose have anything to do with like Buddy Rogers, or does any connection with there? What was his where was his ceiling at? I guess where would people be able to trace back to him?
People would probably remember Buddy Rose best for his run in the AWA. He was an AWA World Tag Team Champion with Doug Summers. And they had the big feud with the Midnight Rockers, Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty.
Oh, wow. Okay, so there you go. There's a good connection.
But Rose was definitely hot on the Pacific Coast. He held the NWA World Tag Team titles, the San Francisco version of the NWA World Tag titles, which WWE doesn't really mention.
Mm-hmm.
Really the whole Pacific Coast's history has been lost to time because Vince doesn't own any footage from out here. So he doesn't really highlight it too often. Even in Roddy Piper's Born to Controversy DVD, I think they spent maybe 5 minutes on Portland. And that was a pretty big part of Roddy's life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. The question was: is Piper still involved with Portland Wrestling? I know his son Colt is doing some things. Is the Piper lineage still somewhere is still touched in Portland a little bit still to this day?
Well, Rod still lives here in the area, and he was most recently involved with the Portland Wrestling Uncut project. But the last year, I don't think he's really been involved in wrestling here locally. I know he's busy with his podcast. Just from my personal experiences working with him on Uncut, he did express to me that he is getting a little tired of traveling, and would love to be able to just stay on the West Coast and do things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you got to make money.
Yeah. What's Portland Uncut? What's that? What was that?
Portland Wrestling Uncut was another attempt. There's been, I think it was the fourth or fifth attempt to revive Portland Wrestling.
Oh, okay.
And, I think that if you want me to shoot on it, guys, you want me to give you the shoot?
Yeah, go for it. I mean, if they're not around, or if they deserve to be shot on them.
It was a money mark
Okay.
who decided to get in the business, and he knew everything about the business, yet he's out of business 9 months later. Yeah, and $100,000 later too.
Ouch.
And it was just kind of one of those things where just a lack of vision, I think, and it's evident that because they're not around, that it didn't last. And I think that a lot of promoters in this area want to give their promotion instant credibility by using the name Portland Wrestling, but they don't really have any follow through. And it's unfortunate because every one of those promotions, it's like a nail in the coffin of Portland Wrestling. And I'm interested in seeing what the next promotion will be that tries to call itself Portland Wrestling.
Man, I would, and I'm getting more and more into the roots of things, and hearing you talk, and obviously Tommy reads a lot of the history too, and I'll admit it, man, I'm not really deep into the, the NWA and anything really before that, but man, this is everything you're talking about is just super, super interesting, and it's kind of funny to me that there really isn't a documentary that's out right now, kind of highlighting these things. So it's, to me, it kind of seems like you kind of fell into this naturally, and I think that really your purpose is just kind of restoring order to history and kind of keeping the balance of the wrestling realm intact.
I would love to do that. I have half a dozen ideas for different documentaries, predominantly based in the Pacific Rim.
Mm-hmm.
From Portland Wrestling to San Francisco to Los Angeles. And I think one of the reasons that you don't see documentaries put out, other than that Vince doesn't own the footage, because believe me, Vince tried to buy the footage, but there's no footage to buy because Don Owen.
You got 425 videos on your YouTube channel right there. I mean, come on.
I do, but it took me 9 years of meeting different fans who had, like my buddy Kelly had 9 VHS tapes of Portland Wrestling he taped off TV.
Wow.
My buddy Eric Hansen gave me a couple tapes. My buddy Lugwrench showed up with 5 tapes just this last month. And really, it's that collection I have online is, 30 or 40 different fans' tapes that they said, hey, legit, what do we do with these VHS tapes? I said, well, give them to me and I'll transfer them to digital media so that we can put them online so we can all share together.
Yeah.
That's huge, man. See, that's...
I do get some heat for it, but that's okay. I can take it. I'm a big boy.
Well, it's you're contributing back, man, and that's the thing. Like you know the history, and you're willing to learn more of the history. And really, dude, I can tell, from how you talk about it, that truly, man, this is a passion for you. This isn't just some wacky ploy, man. Like you really have a strong interest in this, and that's freaking rad, man. That kind of lights a fire in me to want to learn more.
Well, people should learn more. The West Coast is so fascinating. People don't know that tag team wrestling started here in the aughts. 1903, I think, the first tag team match was held in California. We had tag team gold out here 20, 30 years before they had tag titles back east. Even though now we talk about the NWA World Tag Team titles, and immediately you think of Mid-Atlantic and the Crockett promotion and Georgia and that region.
Mm-hmm.
But really, we had NWA World Tag Team Champions in San Francisco back in the 50s and 60s, one of our first tag team champion, or actually our very first tag team champion in Portland, Oregon, was Odd Job from the James Bond film Goldfinger.
Oh, wow.
People don't know he was a wrestler.
That's crazy.
And the history here is lost, Same with the NWA United States Heavyweight title. Also ran out of San Francisco 25 years before you saw a U.S. title in Mid-South and that area of the world. And it's very unfortunate it's lost, but the reason it's lost is because Don Owen did not foresee any value in saving the tapes. He could have spent $10 a month to have the tapes archived. But like most wrestling promoters, he wanted to save a dime anywhere he could. And so they would just wipe the tapes and tape over them.
Oh gosh, this seems that seems insane right now.
Yeah, in retrospect, it's insane, but that's just the way it was. And especially if you ever, if you go online right now and you look at the Wikipedia for the lineage of Portland Wrestling's just the heavyweight title, and the names you will see are unbelievable. Nick Bockwinkel was a heavyweight champion here. Pat Patterson had a huge run here with a guy named Pepper Martin, who actually went on to. Do you guys remember Superman 2?
Yes.
Remember that guy that punched out? You remember the guy that punched out Clark Kent in the diner?
Yeah, when he was he was a dork. Yeah, is that when he lost his powers, or?
Yeah, when he lost his powers, the guy in the imagine this, he was wearing flannel.
Representing the Northwest.
That was Pepper Martin, and he was a heavyweight champion here in the 60s. That had a huge run with Pat Patterson, and went on to become an actor. Other guys that got their start here. Jesse Ventura held his first title here Jimmy Snuka held his first title here. Kurt Hennig and his father held tag team gold here. And, of course, Kurt had a lot more success here later on, going into a feud with the Dynamite Kid. And, I mean, the names go on and on. Scott Norton, Brian Adams, Raven with Scotty the Body here and got his first run here.
Wow.
And
oh
it just,
my goodness, man!
I mean,
just this
it goes on and
wealth
on.
of knowledge.
It's just, man, it seems like you're just scratching the surface with this of the forefathers of pro wrestling. I mean, this just seems just like a one little, like...
You guys want to know the one that interests me the most?
Yeah, fire away.
This is the one that fascinates me the most. The gentleman Pepper Martin from Superman 2, who was a champion here.
Mm-hmm.
He held tag team gold with two different men, a man named Shake Thomas and a man named Luther Lindsay. And Shake Thomas and Luther Lindsay were black. Pepper Martin was white. Mm-hmm. This was in the 1950s. They were holding tag team gold together. In Kentucky in the 1950s, they had a Negro championship because black men couldn't wrestle white men.
Wow.
Whoa.
So I think that shows you the difference between the Pacific Coast and the rest of the nation.
Even back then, it was progressive compared to the rest of the nation, I guess.
Well, let's not get me started on that. There's another reason I moved to Arizona too, brother.
Crazy. Well, look, man, and again, I feel like we're just barely denting the foam on this, but we got to take a quick little break. And when we get back, I got a couple more questions for you. I mean, this is, again,
when we come back, let's talk more Portland wrestling. I think this show is just Raw, TNA this week has been wiped out in favor of Portland wrestling. Because I got a ton more questions.
I'd love to hear that. That's awesome.
Yeah, heck yeah. This is fascinating stuff. Let's take a quick little break. And when we come back, we will have more of Matthew Merz, our excellent guest host today for the Forefathers of Portland Wrestling. So stick around, elbow droppers. Thank you for listening to the Bros Before Elbows podcast. This specific episode is brought to you by the Forefathers of Portland Wrestling. Be sure to check out the Kickstarter page and contribute towards preserving the history of wrestling through the Pacific Northwest. Your contributions will go towards keeping the realm of wrestling history in balance. Thanks for listening to the Bros Before Elbows podcast. You know where to find us on social media on Twitter and Facebook. Thanks for listening. Welcome back to the Bros Before Elbows podcast with our special guest, the founder of the Forefathers of Portland Wrestling, our buddy Matthew Merz, back in the show.
Back in the show.
I love how correctly you say my last name. It's a real struggle for a lot of people. That's awesome.
It's the alliteration, the Eminem. I think it's kind of throws everyone off.
I don't see why that's that hard of a last name to pronounce. It seems pretty phonetically sound.
You know, a lot of people like to throw the T in there and say Merz, but I've noticed, that's from I Love Lucy. Fred and Ethel Merz were the neighbors. And I've noticed that people under 30 never say it.
I didn't even think about that. I used to watch a lot of I Love Lucy going to bed. Nick at Night, man.
Yeah, dude.
That's where it was at.
Save up some images of Lucy for the Spank Bank. I get it.
Lucille Ball was a beautiful woman, all right?
She was gorgeous.
She was
even
dynamite.
When she was older.
Hey, man, she was powerful, dude. Women in comedy, man, during that time.
Man.
Damn,
she was
son.
One of the only ones.
Nothing sexier than a woman in power.
Totally.
Bang. Anywho, between the break, oh, God.
Would you do it with Linda McMahon?
Can we talk about Stephanie McMahon? I mean, she's just powerful, right? Come on. Man.
I'll get sued if I talk about Stephanie McMahon. Oh man.
It's a very lovely family. They're very attractive, and I'm sure they're very quaint in person.
I would do it I want to take a shower with the whole McMahon family.
Oh, okay. Oh, man.
Are we on the air now? Are we back now?
Let's set that out. Okay, we're back. Between the break, we talked about one of our favorite factions to come along in a long time, the WWE, the Wyatt family. And you said the Wyatt family, the gimmick, the cult leader gimmick, maybe has some roots in the Oregon professional wrestling, the Portland professional wrestling history. Can you explain that connection to the fans out there?
Here's what I think of when I see Bray Wyatt.
Okay.
I think of the Moondogs. You guys remember the Moondogs? Moondog Spot, Moondog Rex, Moondog Spike, a bunch of Moondogs. There's always been Moondogs, right?
Mm-hmm.
The first Moondog was Moondog Lonnie Main. And Moondog Lonnie Main, other than being a 3-time United States heavyweight champion and a 3-time world tag champion, Lonnie Main was the first Moondog. Lonnie Main also held the NWA Pacific Northwest heavyweight title 11 times, and he held the NWA Pacific Northwest tag team titles 17 times. And check this out. This was before he was 33 years old. He died at 33 in a horrific car accident in Southern California.
Wow.
And he collected over 30 championships before he left this earth. And that's really what I think of when I think of Bray Wyatt. Even though Bray Wyatt is, definitely that cult leader, and I mean, that's one of the few things WWE is doing that I love. If it wasn't for the Wyatts and the Shield, I really don't know what they would have other than a bunch of workers who aren't being pushed properly.
But okay, so what was the Moondogs? For people who don't know the Moon, I know Moondog is it not Vachon? Wasn't he? Was he a Moondog or was I'm thinking someone else?
Say that who?
Moondog, like Vachon, or that's Mad Dog
No,
Vachon.
Mad Dog Vachon, who actually was also an NWA Pacific Northwest heavyweight champion.
Okay, so I'm totally off on my connection. So what was the Moondogs? What was their deal?
No, they were just kind of this wild backwoods, kind of, like think of the Wyatt family without the cult mentality.
Okay.
Just real wild, roughhouse kind of guys from the backwoods of Kentucky or wherever, Kind of that inbred deliverance kind of group.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, that was their gimmick, and that, that really wouldn't get over today.
Yeah.
But with that twist of the cult leader that Bray Wyatt has brought, whew, baby, that's dynamite, man. I can't believe they jobbed him to Cena at WrestleMania 30.
Yeah, that was, I don't know. You can't have Cena lose at WrestleMania. Like, that's
but why would you have your top heel lose?
Well, because I think they're setting the storyline up for, it doesn't matter if Bray Wyatt loses physically. He's trying to beat John Cena mentally. So really, like, there's no losing for Bray Wyatt. He can only just get that much more in your head.
I didn't realize they still had storylines in the WWE.
Gotta watch it. Gotta watch it every week. My brother, brother from another mother. Yeah, it was good stuff. So speaking of go back to the Forefathers of Pro Wrestling. So the NWA era started like in the 50s. And like, what was that like a big like? Was that kind of like a breakthrough for Portland wrestling, or was that like kind of like is that like a downfall for Portland wrestling? Was that a good thing or a bad thing joining up with the NWA?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know if there's a right answer to that because, I mean, wrestling was, there were big boom periods in wrestling in the Northwest. One of the big boom periods was like the teens. 1910 through 1920, and then again in the 30s with Gorgeous George Wagner, and then the 60s and 70s was really big here too. Mm-hmm. But the truth is you've got to remember this was a time, we live in such a modern era. We're talking on Skype over a computer right now through something called the interweb, and we didn't have that at all. So what was unique about the Northwest region was you could send Kurt Hennig, who was green as grass, out to the Northwest. You could send Scott Norton out here and let them cut their teeth and pay their dues and learn the business without getting major exposure. Because a guy that's in Tennessee or a guy that's in Georgia or a guy who was working for the Crockett's in Mid-Atlantic, they got a lot more exposure in the aftermags of that day, the Pro Wrestling Illustrateds, the Wrestler, Inside Wrestling, all of those. Mm-hmm. But this was really a great place for a guy to learn the business and learn the sport, whether he got over or not. It didn't really matter in the scheme of things. But when I was a kid, the NWA World Champion never came here because we didn't need the NWA World Champion. We are such a unique region of America in that older era where you could come out here and work for 2 years and then go somewhere else and become someone completely different because you didn't get exposed to the more populated regions of America, which was obviously the East Coast and the Midwest. Mm-hmm. And I think that is why you see so many of those names in that Portland Wrestling Heavyweight Championship list.
So was Portland? What was okay? You said the boom theaters, the 60s, 70s, and the 30s. What happened after the 70s, going to the 80s? What was anything that was like a scandal, or was there like just fans finding some other stuff to do? What happened when it kind of I guess the roller coaster went down a little bit?
To me, it's like that I was born in 1980, so I grew up on the 80s in Portland wrestling, and it was always pretty filled up whenever I was there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what happened was the way we find our entertainment changed. Cable television came in.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Vince McMahon began his national expansion. And this was kind of the last stop, and I think that's why we were the last of the territories to go the way of the buffalo, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, we still had, we had Billy Jack Haynes out here, and Tom Zink, and Bobby Jaggers. I'm just looking at actually the list right now. Tatsumi Fujinami, who is huge in Japan, was a champion here.
Mm-hmm.
Raven was here. Obviously the Grappler, one of the biggest names in Portland in the 80s, was here. But what happened was, I want to say it was in 1990, KPTV convinced Don Owen that it would be okay to move his show from the 11 p.m. time slot to the midnight time slot because the fans were so loyal, they would tune in.
Yeah.
But I think that was really the first chink in the armor, so to speak. No offense to any Asians listening.
None taken.
Let's edit that part out. Okay.
And I think that was really what happened there was, it's like when I was a kid, I remember being a kid watching Portland wrestling. Let me tell you, brother, it was a struggle to stay up till 11 o'clock to watch wrestling.
Sure, yeah.
But as soon as that Portland wrestling intro music hit, you better believe you're not falling asleep for an hour and a half. You'll be up till 12:30 watching it.
Mm-hmm.
But staying up till midnight, it was harder, and I think that it cost them a lot of their fan base when that happened. And well, eventually I think Don Owen also, he was old, he was like 89, 80 years old, and it was just time for him to retire and enjoy some retirement. And his kids didn't want to run the business; they wanted to run the family farm they had down in Eugene.
Mm-hmm.
And because I have heard that Don had a couple opportunities to take the show national.
Wow.
And he decided not to do it. Like the majority of promoters, then they thought that by sticking together in the National Wrestling Alliance, they would stop Vince.
Yeah.
And Vince knew he couldn't be stopped with the advent of Cablevision and really the advent of videotape, because you could bicycle your show from region to region to region, and really, it's pretty cheap to put 10 VHS tapes in a machine, or back then they were probably using 2-inch tape, and then send those 25 tapes to all these different territories to air. Plus, Vince also, back then it was, KPTV was shooting Portland wrestling and editing the product together and putting it on TV. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, Vince McMahon comes in and he says, not only am I going to take your TV time, but I'm going to pay the station to put it on, and they don't have to do any work. All they got to do is put a tape in a machine and hit play.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, it was just, America was changing, and the way we are entertained as individuals changed. And, that's the fate of it. I think the NWA was, I think he probably would have still been around, but I think the reason that Don Owen joined the NWA was the political power it would help him wield, because he was still in a big feud with Ted Thigh and Virgil Hammond back then, and he wanted to solidify his grasp on the Northwest, because the Owens really just had Oregon, and by joining the NWA, they were able to, I think, expand a little bit more into Washington and really take over the entire Pacific Northwest and carve out this region. And of course, there were other promoters that worked under Don, like Tex Hager was out in Walla Walla, which is like Eastern Washington.
Mm-hmm.
So, he had him promoting there. You had Dutch Savage promoting up in Seattle. You had Gene Kaniski up in British Columbia, and they were all working together, but it was Don who was kind of the head of the group, as far as like, he was the liaison to the National Wrestling Alliance. And all these other promoters worked under him, booking the same talent. Or like in British Columbia, they would bring up half their boys from Oregon, and then half their boys would come from BC in that area. And I think that's what happened. I don't know if that even answered your question. I think did I get sidetracked there?
Yeah, no, I got a lot of good history. in there. For sure. I think one of the biggest stories in wrestling history that's never been covered because well, obviously WWF or what was it called before the WWF? It's called the WWF or something like that, or
Worldwide Wrestling Federation.
yeah, Worldwide Wrestling Federation. Yeah, but before they went national, I guess there are probably similar stories in Minnesota and Florida and Georgia and Texas of the WWF invading their territory and going national and how that affected them. So I'm sure each of those regions have kind of like a similar story to what happened in Portland and the Northwest wrestling scene.
Yeah, you know, there's really two basic stories there. There's the promoters who saw what was looming on the horizon and they
Mm-hmm.
sold out to Vince. They sold their territory to Vince. And then there were those who were stubborn and said there's no way this punk kid is going to take us over. Because we've been in this game for 40, 50 years. This kid isn't going to do nothing. He doesn't know nothing.
Yeah.
And you know, there is that famous story I'm sure you guys have heard when Jim Ross was at the National Wrestling Alliance meeting and was in the bathroom and all the promoters came in and actually had a conversation about, well, we can just put Vince at the bottom of a river, case closed. And I mean, and it's funny, but they were serious.
Yeah.
Because I mean, putting a bullet in the kid's head and dumping him in the river is a lot cheaper than trying to compete with this little bastard.
Oh my gosh, man, crazy cutthroat business, dude.
Yeah, it was cutthroat, you know, and that's where and that's the NWA, you know, is it was we're gonna blackball you if you don't do what we say, wrestler. You know, you're the wrestler and you're gonna do what I tell you, and if you don't like it, you can leave. But where are you gonna go? You're gonna go to my friend Vern in Minnesota because he's gonna blackball you too. You're gonna go to my friend Eddie down in Florida. He's gonna blackball you too. My friend Fritz down in Texas. You don't stand a chance, brother. You're gonna do what we tell you to do. And you know, you had some federations open up. Like one of the most successful, I think, for a while there was Angelo Poffo, who was Randy Savage's father.
Mm-hmm.
The Poffos ran the, I want to say, the IWC, which was kind of Tennessee, Kentucky area.
Yeah,
And
yeah. They feuded with Jerry Lawler's promotion, right?
Yeah, eventually when Angelo decided to close up shop, they
Mm-hmm.
actually had a good little run with Jerry against Randy Savage for a little while there.
Crazy, awesome.
Actually, if you guys want to see, I mean, I know I'm supposed to promote, you know, the Forefathers of Portland Wrestling, but if you guys want to see a really good documentary that's not a WWE production,
Mm-hmm.
watch Memphis Heat. If you guys
Okay.
haven't seen Memphis Heat, that is great. And they you know, they have the interviews with Rocky Johnson, Jerry Lawler, Jeff Jarrett's dad, Jerry Jarrett, who was the promoter,
Mm-hmm.
and they really kind of cover that whole history up to when Vince started his takeover.
Hmm. Well,
And,
where could you find Memphis Heat at? You think
Memphis.
YouTube or is it
Well,
on?
you know, I know they were a Kickstarter project, but I would think that they're probably on Netflix.
Okay, yeah.
You know, or if you ask legit, he might send you a link to a private video he uploaded to the site.
Of course, man. So man, it's Forefathers of Portland Wrestling. Back to that, there's just so many things to touch on. It seems like there's a Forefathers. If this project goes through, there could be a Forefathers of Texas wrestling, or Forefathers of Florida, or Minnesota, or Tennessee, or San Francisco.
Really connecting the dots of the industry. You know, yeah. I mean, is that kind of an idea you have for the future?
Well, you know, I think that there are other people in other areas that are probably more qualified to do Florida or to do Tennessee. You know, obviously Memphis Heat came out of Tennessee, and
Mhm.
that's, you know, a beautiful documentary. And you know, I wouldn't want to take away from the Matt Legit who is in Tennessee. You know, my goal is, you know, really the Pacific Rim, because that is, to me, that's what's really neglected. You know, Vince owns the USWA footage from Jerry Lawler's promotion in Tennessee. He owns Florida. He owns Mid-South. He owns the AWA. He owns World Class. So, I mean, what is there really to do? And you will notice if you get into looking at wrestling documentaries, you will see that there are smaller documentaries that have come out that are just as good as Vince's. They're not as high a quality of production, so to speak, but they're just as insightful, if not more, because Vince has a lot of respect for the business and does kind of tiptoe around the controversy as best he can. Whereas, like, if you go watch the Heroes of World Class, is a great one about Dallas and the Von Erich family.
Mhm.
And I'm just gonna put over all these other documentaries that aren't related to me in any way. But they're good and they're insightful, and basically what they'll do, it's kind of like you guys saw the ECW documentary, Rise and Fall of ECW.
ECW.
Yeah, and there was another one that just came out, Barbed Wire City or something like that recently came out. Do you hear about that one?
I don't know about that one. I know
Yeah.
that at the same time the Rise and Fall came out, there was another one that came out called Forever Hardcore, which
Yeah,
was which was
yeah.
awesome because it was all the guys that weren't under WWE's contract talking about the exact same stuff. So you get kind of both sides of the story in a way. And I think that's what's really cool about these independent documentaries that come out, and what makes them so valuable is that you're able to get the whole story instead of the manufactured story from Connecticut.
Yeah, I mean, because there's only so much thing that WWF can cover before they hit that glass ceiling of WWF management and the angle they want to push. So with these independent documentaries, like the World Class one, the Memphis Heat one, like I said, there's Barbed Wire City, I think it's called, or something that came out like 18 or 12 months ago about ECW that's not affiliated with the WWF at all. That I think they had like a Kickstarter or something that came out about a year ago. So those. So they give you a different angle, a different perspective, and they're not like they don't have the WWF looking over. I mean WWE looking over their shoulder. So so you can have a different perspective on history. And there's so much history as we've been able to cover so far on this podcast.
What I find really fascinating with all of this is there's a lot of exclusive history. I mean, these are stories and these are items of knowledge that really you just can't find anywhere, I feel.
No, you really can't. Like a great example is, when I was doing my big 150 hours of research just to wrap my head around what my project was going to be, I realized that the first 50, 75 hours of footage or of research I did, it wasn't really true. Because, that's the thing about history is, if I give you a one-page write-up on one specific event in wrestling, how you read it and how you tell that story to someone else is different than how I'm going to read it and tell it to someone else.
It's like the game of telephone. Everyone gets the story gets like kind of
it gets reinterpreted
every time you tell it. Yeah,
it gets reinterpreted, and that's really the fine line I'm trying to walk. Is I don't want to put in perspective. I want to, but that's also the beautiful thing about wrestling historians, is that they do separate the fact from fiction, and they'll tell you, okay, this is a fact. We know this is a fact. We know this is a fact. We know this is a fact. But this right here, we think this is true, but we're not sure. And then it's like, and some things you can kind of tie together. Like, for example, the Pacific Coast light heavyweight title, which Gorgeous George Wagner held and Ted Thigh held, and all these men before the NWA held. There was also the Pacific Coast middleweight title and the Pacific Coast junior heavyweight title. But through doing a day's worth of research on this and actually making a graph and a chart that I could actually go title change by title change through, I realized that there really was no middleweight title. There really was no junior heavyweight title, the initial junior heavyweight title. What had happened was, in different towns, they would promote that belt as a different belt. Because, for example, you'll see, if you look at the lineage, you'll see the Pacific Coast light heavyweight title stops at one point, and for like 2 years it's called the middleweight title, and then all of a sudden the light heavyweight title kicks back in. And I think we can say with a reasonable amount of doubt that that was just one title, and it was just the news reporter would write it as the middleweight title or the junior heavyweight title, or in some cases in the British Columbia Bellingham area, the light heavyweight title was called the heavyweight title for a year, and it all just really depended on the region. And so you got to be careful when you walk through those things. Like Ted Thigh's a great example. For 5 years I thought Ted Thigh was Australian because everything I read said that he was from Australia. Well, it turns out he's actually from Minnesota, where his brother was a governor and a senator, and he was just the promoter of wrestling in Australia. But over time, that got interpreted differently at one point, and everyone went from that point. It's kind of like the best thing I can liken it to, even though this is really a bizarre reference, most people think Adolf Hitler was really into the occult. But the reason people think that is because of one book that was written that really was not. It was based on fact, but it was a work of fiction. And the truth is, Hitler really had no belief in the occult, no belief in God. He only believed in his own providence. But over time, and over, conversations like this, over dinner here or dinner there or drinks over there, that slowly got into, well, the only way we can rationalize what Adolf Hitler did to 8 million Jews is by assuming he was into the occult and into devil worship and all this nonsense.
Wait. Did you just compare this podcast to a conversation of dinner of Hitler?
I think I just compared the entire history of professional wrestling to Nazism.
Okay.
But ultimately, what you're trying to say is that there's like a fine, like it's basically it's just what you have heard or only what you know on the foam. But there's a lot more exploration that there's just more that meets the eye. It's not all smoke and mirrors. It's
Here's the thing is that there are 3 sides to every story. There's your side, there's my side, and there's the truth. And no one is lying because experiences that are shared serve each person differently.
Mm-hmm.
And while, I could tell you stories from the local indie scene in Portland, and my perspective on what happened is completely different than the perspective of the other guy involved. And somewhere in between maybe lies the truth, or maybe I'm telling the truth and he's full of shit. One or the other.
Mm-hmm.
But that's that's the reality of anything. There really are 3 sides to every story because how you experienced the event is different than how I experienced the event.
So yeah, absolutely. It's all messaging, and it's all getting the right communication out. I think what's really cool with this whole project that you're doing is that's what you're looking for. Is you're looking for the truth. You're looking for you're looking to seek the right puzzle pieces to connect the dots and not just go off of what we think we know, only what we've been brought up to hear exactly from, oh, I briefly read this, or, oh yeah, I think somebody that I think knows what they're talking about told me this. Like, you are legitimately going into the pit and you are doing the correct research. This isn't just Google search stuff that you're slapping together, Bing search that you're slapping together. I mean, this is really educational stuff that you're putting yourself into to be able to tell everybody else about. And from the sounds of everything, it really sounds like organically the Pacific Northwest really holds a lot of history, a lot of culture, a lot of heritage in the ultimate realm of sports entertainment, even before it was, as we spoke about earlier, things were getting a little fixed and whatnot, but really, like, you're digging into the deep roots before everything is as we know it. It sounds like there's I was reading your Kickstarter page. There's 9 days left on the campaign itself. So, for everybody that's listening, please, contribute to this. This is really cool. This is, again, keeping and preserving history and making sure that things that are important to the industry don't go unnoticed or don't go unsaid and get lost in time. I think this is a really, really excellent opportunity. And it's rad that you're taking on this role, man, that you're, again, wanting to travel and obviously needing this money through the Kickstarter to travel. With that being said, when the money's raised, if you get to your goal, where's the first place you go? What's day one look like for you?
Well, I think that I would probably start with the other historians who have been kind enough to help me. There's a wrestler named Matt Farmer who is an incredible historian in the Northwest who has helped me through this whole thing and really helped me find those missing pieces where I go to Matt and I say, well, this happened and this happened, but it doesn't quite, it doesn't dovetail together, Matt. Why is that? And Matt says, well, that it might be because of this, but why don't you contact Dean Silverstone, who was a promoter for a long time in the Northwest and wrote a great book called I Ain't No Pig Farmer. And it's men like Dean Silverstone and Matt Farmer and another man named J. Michael Kenyon who have really helped me and have been kind enough to say, we'll sit down for interviews. And I'm going to start with interviewing them, and then I'm going to go and find more families. I've already tracked down some families, but you've got to find those families, and you've got to get into their family records. and digitize everything. You know, it's really the long process of digitizing. And, you know, I've got to find as many photos as I can of these men because let's face it, there's one picture of Ted Thigh online and it's like 200 pixels by 200 pixels. It's ridiculous.
Man, that'd be so cool if you can find some really cool black and white. There are so many people on Reddit that could colorize photos. So, I mean, if you are able to find some really archived stuff, that would be cool, just to kind of enhance things a little bit or whatnot. But that's crazy stuff that you're looking to capture.
Well, I have a feeling I'm probably going to spend about 6 months editing this. I have a documentary that kind of inspired me. It's totally unrelated to professional wrestling, but there's a great documentary called The Kid Stays in the Picture. And the way they used their pictures was they used, you know, Photoshop and a program called Motion to literally make the pictures come to life, which has become more and more commonplace in most documentaries, but for some reason is never done in wrestling documentaries. And because let's face it, like we are talking about a bunch of old black and white pictures here. And that can be either a very boring, dusty scrapbook that your grandmother's trying to show you that you don't really identify with, or with, you know, just a few simple little tricks of editing, you can make those pictures come alive and breathe with the electricity of the times. I mean, we're talking about men who were wrestling in the roaring 20s. Like, could you imagine being a multi-millionaire in the 20s? Man, time of your life, brother, time of your life.
Yeah, $1 million man scotch. $1 million man in the 20s is like the $100 million man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The $1 billion man, the oil tycoon man, the Monopoly man, dude.
The monocle
Repo man.
No, he's Repo Man's still a jobber, whatever era we're talking about. But I've got two more questions, and then I tap out. But so if the Forefathers of Professional Wrestling, like what is the timeline? I know you're talking about the 1900s and the Gotch era, and before that, like is going to be like 70% before the 1950s, and then like you're going to stop at the 70s.
Everything. I'm going to stop in like at 1951, 1952 is an interesting time because in 51 Dono joined the NWA. In 1952 he started tag team titles, and he also got on television. And
huge stuff.
I think that you know, if the Forefathers of Portland Wrestling is successful, my second project would be for a lot less money, and it would probably be the Legends of Portland Wrestling, and then I would cover the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Gotcha. So the Forefathers do a lot of the shoot stuff, a lot of stuff before they turn the matches into works and a lot of that history.
Yeah, because you know, all these men, they didn't wrestle for what we call Portland Wrestling. They wrestled for the Owen family, but it wasn't part of the National Wrestling Alliance, and it really was a different era, and these men weren't on television. And I think that there are two completely different stories, really. They really are. And you know, if I was to do it all as one story, it would probably have to be a 6-hour miniseries. And I would probably have to ask for 3 times as much money, but by doing this project first, and by meeting all the people I'm going to encounter, I'm going to collect. I'm going to keep my eye out for everything Portland wrestling. You know, I'm not just going to digitize photos from 1920. If I find a photo from 1958, you better believe I'm going to digitize it and plan ahead and start to build an archive for the next project. But of course, ultimately, that's going to be up to the people listening to this podcast right now.
Absolutely, man, and we support you 1,000,000%, man. Your vision is huge, dude. Dream big and keep dreaming, and don't stop. You know what I mean? I think it's, dude, the cause is awesome, man. And I'm, you know, at first you piqued my interest, but now you've got my attention, you know. And I'm hoping that a lot of other people catch on to it too, man. And
well, they got 9 days to catch on. They better get on it.
Hey, man, we'll do what we can. We'll give it the rub. We'll give it the bros before elbows rub. You know, we won't elbow drop you, but we'll do what we can
to drop me.
Give you some pyrotechnics.
I'll tell you what. You know, if you contribute and you get a Blu-ray, I'll let you elbow drop me. That's fine.
All right, cool.
Wow, that's great. That's a great promise. Last question. Portland Wrestling today in 2014, what's it like on a weekend, on a Saturday night? Is there hope? Is it just a bunch of jumbled mess right now? Everyone's kind of scrambling to be the one big fish in a small pond. Can you describe it? Can you set the scene in under 2 minutes?
Hour.
Yeah, no. Yeah, get the Cliff Notes version for people who are interested in Portland wrestling today.
I think there's hope. I think you have a lot of talented wrestlers in the Northwest. I think the two biggest problems I see in the Northwest, from the perspective of a person who's been around the business for a decade but it doesn't wrestle,
Mm-hmm.
I think one, you have no real legitimate leadership, no one with a real vision. You have a lot of people who want to be a leader, but a leader is not someone who leads. A leader is someone who should be followed. And that is what is mostly lacking in the Northwest. And I think also there are individuals in the Northwest who, how do I say this appropriately? I think there's a lot of people in the Northwest who do this as a hobby and pretend that they're professional wrestlers. But let me tell you something. If you don't make $1 at what you do, you're not a professional.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when's the last time you saw somebody flipping hamburgers at McDonald's for free so that they could say they flipped hamburgers at McDonald's?
Yeah.
And I think those are two things, and two big things. I think there's a real resistance on the part of some people in the Northwest to let others help them.
Mm-hmm.
And I have hope for the Northwest, but I honestly am not sure if it's going to be my generation that does it, because I've been around 10 years and I can't tell you what's changed from 2004 when I got into 2014. I haven't really seen anything change. I've seen a lot of people not learn from their mistakes and from the mistakes of others. But I still have hope, because we do have, I mean, there's amazing talent here. Ethan HD is, arguably the best wrestler in the Northwest today. Jeremy Blanchard, arguably the best wrestler in the Northwest today. Patrick Large can really go places if he decides to get out of the Northwest.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just not happening here for whatever reason. I have my thoughts on it. Other people have their thoughts on it, but I got to the point where I couldn't drink the Kool-Aid anymore, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
I was spending 30 hours a week to put wrestling on television, and I was doing it all out of my own pocket, and I didn't see anyone else working as hard as me. I saw there was a small handful of wrestlers who wanted to work as much as possible and make this thing successful, but I think that they might be outweighed by guys that are just weekend warriors and do it as a hobby and would rather live off the name of their trainer than actually create a name for themselves.
Interesting. So a lot of
we go negative when I talk about the indie scene.
a lot of problems, but the new. You said there was some hope. There's some good prospects out there. So maybe
world class, the West Coast Wrestling Connection is on TV in Portland now, and they kind of took over where Uncut fumbled the ball.
Okay.
And hopefully they will do good things. They've got the Grappler booking their show, so that can't hurt. That's for sure. And I know they have a good producer in Dave Marquez, who produces Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. They've got, without a doubt, they have the best promoter as far as being a businessman goes. Jeff Manning is the best promoter in the Northwest as far as treating it like a business. And I think that more than anything would help the Northwest, is just everyone treating it like a business, like it's a job like any other job. And that's my opinion.
Well, I'm hoping that through your documentary, man, that you do start like a kind of like a change in it. You know what I mean? If people are really inspired by the history of it and kind of understand and can recognize the responsibility that they could take on themselves, just like you say, treat it like a business. It's like me being a studio musician, man, or me being in bands and stuff, dude. It's you have to treat it like a business. You have to figure out, cool, how do I make $10 at this? Oh, rad, I do this. Sweet. How can I make $50 at this? Rad. And how can I get more things? How can I do better? How can I grow? How can I learn? To me, like, if you treat it like a business, failure's not an option, because failure's just refusing to learn. And if you tell yourself that I refuse to learn, then you start gaining some new perspective. So hopefully through this this documentary and through the research that you do that, people do kind of harness that organic feel, like, oh, a lot of it did start here. And, I do have the responsibility as an entertainer and as a sports professional to do this not only for myself, but really for the legacy of the history of Portland wrestling, just like everything we've been talking about. There's so much from it, man. So,
and that's the other thing, Anthony, is here's the thing, is that when you create a documentary like this, or the guys in the Northwest, the wrestlers in the Northwest have these great broad shoulders they could be standing on and saying, this is our lineage, and they can take pride in that 100 years of heritage. But without exposing that to fans, basically it's, you got to educate your fans. It's like, why was the pile driver illegal in Tennessee? Well, because you told the fans it was. And until the fans know about it, there is no heritage. It's kind of lost to time.
Yeah.
And really, like 30 years from now, this legitimately, everything we've talked about tonight will be gone, because there won't be anyone left to share it. And that's another big reason I wanted to do this documentary, is because people don't read anymore. The generation behind me, they don't read nothing. They might read a comic book or, a magazine, but they're not going to sit down and read a 350-page book about professional wrestling. Whereas myself, I'll read 2 of those books in one weekend and then figure out how to use those in my documentary. And kids today, they'll watch a video and they'll be fascinated by it, but they won't read a book.
Yeah, it's like that classic dilemma of, oh, I got this book report, I'll just watch the movie.
Exactly.
I got this book report on Portland Wrestling. I'm just going to watch the Forefathers of Portland Wrestling. That's my plan.
And then crush it and get an A+ because you're actually learning something. You're not just getting highlights of baloney.
And the other great thing is, if you're a wrestler, what's cool about this documentary is you'll hear about a lot of things that haven't been done in the business in 80 years. So you've got stuff you can steal and use that people have never seen before. Like, do you guys even know the Cornish style of jacket wrestling? People don't even know what that is. Jacket wrestling, that's a style. Belt wrestling, that's a style. Collar and elbow. People think of collar and elbow, they think of how wrestlers tie up.
Yeah.
That's a whole style of wrestling. There were the Vermont Trippers, who, the idea was all you had to do was make your opponent fall down and you would get a fall. And people just don't even know that. And I think that would be an awesome gimmick for a wrestler. You have that English wrestler who demands that the first style, we're going to have a 2 out of 3 falls match, because in England we do the round style. And the first round is going to be collar and elbow, and the second round is going to be the Cornish style, which is jacket wrestling. And then, of course, you have your third round is, catch as catch can, or freestyle wrestling, or whatever, more modern professional wrestling.
I'm going to pitch this idea. He's going to be except he's frozen in time. He's frozen soldier or something. And he popped out, and he still thinks it's 1930s.
Rip Van Winkle.
Rip Van Winkle persona. I like it. We're going to pitch this. We're going to send this to Connecticut after this. After we wrap this up.
Yeah, we definitely have covered a lot, Matt, and we support you a ton, man,
Thanks, guys.
with the Kickstarter. And, dude, it was a pleasure having you on the show, man. You're a wealth of knowledge and passionate about everything, man.
It was a pleasure talking to 2 professional guys who run a podcast. My Lord. What a dream.
Woo! Living the dream every day, man. It's all about being happy. Happiness takes effort. Misery's comfort. Remember that.
Ooh, wow.
Wow. Okay. All right, you hippie. Anywho, back to Atlanta. Thanks for coming on, man, and thanks for checking us out. And we'll be back in next week, right, Amp?
Yeah, we'll be back next week, regular programming. And again, thank you again, Matthew Merz. Everybody check out the Forefathers of Portland Wrestling Kickstarter. We'll put it up on our Facebook page. I know we put some shout-outs there. Also, I think we were tweeting about it, too.
Hey, if you guys want to watch some Portland wrestling from the NWA era, did you know you can go to youtube.com/legitprowrestling and see over 2,800 videos spanning 5 decades of Pacific Northwest wrestling?
That's how you plug.
Incredible.
That's how you plug a link.
So good and smooth. Awesome. Well, we'll get this up and for everybody to listen to. And thanks again for coming on the show, Matt.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Put on your flannel and drop an elbow.
Peace.
Peace.